The first thing she said when I found her was, "My husband left me here." She said it calmly, almost like it wasn't unusual. It was just after midnight in late October, and I was doing a routine patrol along an old forest road. I'd been working seasonal forest patrols for several years by then. Most nights were predictable. Check the access roads, look for illegal camping, make sure nobody was inside a closed area, then report back before morning. This was supposed to be one of those nights. Most of the campsites were empty. Then my headlights caught a small tent between the trees. A woman was sitting beside it, alone. I stopped the truck and stepped out. "Ma'am, everything okay?" She looked at me. "My husband left me here." "How long ago?" "About an hour." "Where did he go?" She pointed into the forest. "He went that way. There wasn't a trail in that direction. Just thick trees and darkness." "Did he take a flashlight?" She shook her head. "No." That was the first thing that bothered me. I asked for his name and what he was wearing. She answered immediately. Then I asked why he'd gone into the woods. She looked toward the trees. "I don't know." No fear, no frustration, just those 3 words. I looked around the campsite. There were 2 folding chairs facing a cold fire pit. One was beside her. The other sat several feet away. The ground was still wet from earlier rain. I could see my own footprints. I could see hers. But there was only one set of footprints leading away from the campsite. They disappeared about 30 feet into the trees. I pointed at them. "Are those his?" She stared at the footprints, then quietly said, "No." "Then whose are they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me and asked, "Did you see him?" "No." She turned back toward the forest. "He doesn't usually come back when it gets dark." That was when I called for another ranger. On patrol, we were trained not to enter dense woods alone when there was a possible missing person, especially at night. So while I waited, I asked her to stay near my truck. She nodded. A few minutes passed. Then a branch snapped somewhere in the trees. I raised my flashlight. Nothing. Another branch snapped. Closer. I swept the light across the forest. Still nothing. Then a man's voice came from the darkness. "Hey." The woman suddenly stood up. I looked at her. For the first time that night, she looked frightened. The voice came again. "Hey." I called out, "Sir, this is Forest Service. Come into the clearing." Silence. Then the woman whispered, "That's not my husband." I looked at her. "What?" She grabbed my sleeve. "Don't answer him." The voice came again, much closer this time. "Hey." I stepped back toward the truck. Then another ranger arrived. We searched the area together. No man. No flashlight. No clothing. Nothing. But near the edge of the trees, we found another set of footprints. They came toward the campsite. They stopped directly behind the chair where the woman had been sitting. There were no footprints leading away, just those prints and the chair. The woman wouldn't explain them. We eventually escorted her out of the area. The next morning, I checked the campsite records. The permit belonged to a woman traveling alone. There was no second name, no husband, no additional camper. I contacted her again. She denied ever telling me she had a husband. She said she'd been alone the entire night. I asked her why she'd said those words. She just stared at me. Then, before she left, she looked toward the forest and said, "He said he'd come back for me." She paused, then added, "He always does." I never found out who she was talking about, but I still remember those footprints, because the ones leaving the campsite weren't hers, and the ones coming back stopped right behind her chair. There is one rule experienced hikers learn very quickly. If you hear someone calling to you from somewhere you can't see, don't follow the voice. In the fall of 2022, two experienced hikers, Ethan Walker and Marcus Hale, were exploring a remote section of mountain forest. They carried GPS devices, emergency supplies, and enough food for several days. About 4 hours into the hike, they heard someone shouting from somewhere below the trail. "Ethan!" Both men stopped. Marcus was standing right beside him. Then the voice came again. "Ethan, help me!" It sounded frightened. Ethan believed someone was injured. Marcus told him they should stay on the trail, but Ethan stepped into the woods. Marcus followed. A few minutes later, they found an old backpack lying beside a tree. Marcus recognized it. It belonged to a local hiker who had disappeared in the same forest months earlier. Inside were an old map, a water bottle, and an identification card. Then they heard the voice again. This time, it came from directly behind them. "Ethan." They turned. Nobody was there. Then footsteps started moving through the trees. Fast. Marcus ran uphill. Ethan followed. But when Marcus reached the main trail, Ethan was gone. "Ethan?" No answer. Then, from deep inside the forest, Marcus heard his voice. "Marcus!" Marcus froze. "Ethan?" The voice answered. "Come back." Marcus called emergency services instead. Search teams entered the forest that night. They found Ethan's flashlight about 50 yards from the trail. Nearby was his jacket. There was blood on the sleeve, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. 6 days later, searchers discovered his GPS device beneath a fallen tree. The data showed Ethan leaving the main trail and moving downhill. Then his location suddenly stopped. 3 weeks later, his remains were found several hundred yards away. His death was ruled accidental. There were injuries consistent with a fall, but investigators could never determine exactly what happened. Then they found something else. Investigators initially believed it was Marcus's voice echoing through the forest. Then they checked the recording time. The voice had been captured 11 minutes after Marcus had already reached the main trail. He was alone, and he never went back into the woods. Marcus never returned to that forest. Later, he said the thing that frightened him most wasn't finding Ethan's body. It was hearing Ethan's voice after he already knew Ethan was dead. Because if it wasn't Ethan, then someone or something had been calling his name from inside the trees, and it knew exactly what Ethan sounded like.